Greetings, bike packers and bike travelers. Welcome to another episode of Chainwheel Diaries. Stories about bike travel told by the travelers themselves. I'm your host, Brian Berlin. Today's guest is Gregg Beytin, a bike adventurer that I met through a Meetup group called Southern California Bicycle Camping. Gregg is the organizer of this group, and I've joined many of the weekend overnight bike camping trips this group offers. Gregg is also the organizer of the Facebook group called Bicycle Camping, which currently has over 150,000 members. So strap on your panniers and let's meet Gregg Beytin. Welcome to the podcast, Gregg.
Happy to be here.
Tell us what you're up to these days.
Either not much or a lot. It depends on how you look at it. Because it's the story of retirement. So we just came back from a 3-week road trip with our travel trailer, and we brought the bikes along and never rode them.
Oh.
We had planned to do some touring on our car trip, but it took so long. The driving took so long. It was 4,000 miles. We just completely, misestimated what things would take and what we did. So we saw a lot of nice trees.
I've learned from biking with you that you have quite a history of bike travel. And this is really a podcast about bike travel and the stories. So how did you get started? What were some of your early trips?
Well, I guess my first bike travel was in 1971. And I think it was just some friends. We just thought it'd be fun to ride to Leo Carrillo State Beach. We had our Peugeots and Raleighs and Clubmans, whatever, and we strapped a sleeping bag to the Pletcher rack on the back, whatever I pronounce that, and a day pack with whatever else we had, and we had this fun time. But in a more serious sense, it was kind of an extension of sailboat cruising. Actually, I grew up around sailboats. My father had built a few, and we had some partnerships with some other ones, and so we used to go to Catalina all the time. So this whole kind of travel, camping travel, living in a confined space. And when I got older, I couldn't afford to do the sailing anymore, especially in the kind of a cruising aspect. And I didn't have much money, so the only vacations I figured I could afford were bike touring. So, I had panniers and things like that for a couple of years, like a lot of people do, and didn't really go anywhere. And then I just sort of made myself go, and did a San Francisco to Los Angeles ride. Took the bus to San Francisco, rode back, didn't stay in any hotels, little money, ate cheap, whatever. And it kind of stuck, So for every summer for years, I would do San Francisco to LA. I'd do Eugene, Oregon to San Francisco. I just, the same kinds of places, because the hiker-biker sites were always available, and the transportation was easy, and the weather was not too hot, and, it just seemed like the best places to go. And that became my pattern. There was a kind of change in it too. One of the things I think I liked about it is that back in those days, touring in the 80s is what it would really be described as. Every time I would go, I'd, fly to Eugene, get out of the airport, put my bicycle together, ride to the coast. Next day, I'd be riding down the coast, south down the coast. And I'd always run into people. And after a week or so, maybe less, 3 or 4 days, there was this sort of rolling ad hoc touring group where we'd all, sometimes ride together, always meet in the campgrounds. Sometimes the groups got quite big and got actually sort of organized. You're going to go and get firewood, that kind of thing. So for years, it was never alone. It was always just meeting people on the road and hanging out with them, and they became your best friends for a week, and you never saw them again. Um, and then when we got into the 90s, it changed for some reason. And I remember sitting in this gorgeous campground in Oregon and looking around, and everyone was they're all couples in their 30s and 40s. There was no one, no single, and I'm sort of here I am, and I'm used to always making friends and hanging out. I'm starting to have these trips that repeat themselves where I don't really meet people and I don't really hang out with people much because everyone's got their own group. And that led to eventually to Outdoors Club, which was sort of a precursor to Meetup for this sort of thing. And we just started posting rides, and people started showing up. And you've met a few people that actually go back to the Outdoors Club days who are still around. And that was pretty much, what I kept on doing. Of course, I kept on doing some sort of long trip, when I had extended in the summer when I had time. And as I became financially not so destitute, my equipment got better and things like that. And then Audrey and I, decided to do a cross country trip. So that was the big long one, coast to coast.
Your trip across the U.S., did you follow a certain route, the Transamerica, the Southern Tier, the Northern Tier?
Mostly, we started out with the Lewis and Clark. These are all adventure cycling routes. And then we switched to the switched to the Northern Tier in Montana or something like that. And then we took that all the way to to Michigan,
Yeah.
and took that down into Ohio. And then it was Google Maps to get us to Pittsburgh, which mostly worked. Actually worked really well because we somehow missed the big climb that's legendary to get into Pittsburgh. Um, and then we did the Allegheny Trail from Pittsburgh uh, to the C&O, and then the C&O all the way into Washington, and met up with some of my wife's colleagues, and then eventually a couple of days later finished the trip in Annapolis, Maryland, with a friend. So we used mostly adventure cycling maps, but not exclusively so because we kind of had our own idea of staying where it wasn't so hot. Although in Eastern Washington, we actually had to stop riding at 9 a.m. We had a heat wave. And had a certain time limit, so you had to put it in the miles and get there. And, it was a great trip. I've said since then I would do it again in a heartbeat, but you haven't.
Your European trips, did you follow any of the Eurovelo routes?
Yeah, somewhat like in Portugal, it was Eurovelo. Sometimes we might have, like the last one we did, we went down from Tours to down the Loire River Valley to the coast and then down to La Rochelle. So that was a combination of a couple of Eurovelo. We haven't, in Italy, I think we just made up something. We went from Belgrano, I think, in the Alps to Venice. And so we went south and then east. I don't think that was on, there's so many Eurovelo routes now, that we probably accidentally followed some of them.
You might have.
Well, the bike path in Tyrolia was so incredibly wonderful. It must have been on some Eurovelo route. But, we found is that, and we still do it anyway, it's really easy to overplan. Like on a cross-country trip, we planned the whole thing, night by night, and that was completely gone in a day or two, so that it was figuring it out as we went. In Italy, it always seemed like we got the last hotel room in, whatever Italian city we're in. And with all the other bike tourists, there's all these Germans, with their e-bikes doing these tours, and, we'd always end up in the same place as they would. Same thing in Portugal. We followed the route, but we didn't have any reservations. So we've always done this like no reservation camp when there's a campground if we had our camping gear with us. Our style is we're not we don't do commando camping. I've done that a couple of times. It's almost by accident. We pretty much stay in campgrounds or hotels, and we don't really plan much like that morning or the night before. Well, we'll get to here or there, or something like that. Um, and we just found that planning too much doesn't really work. It's just like an exercise in familiarizing yourself with where you're going, but it doesn't necessarily end up being where you stay.
Well, I've interviewed some folks who have said the same thing. One gentleman had planned out every night and found that he would get to that destination too early. There's there's a debate between planners and non-planners. I'm kind of a
Right.
planner. I kind of like to know, hey, where are we going to end up? What's going to be the situation? But I'm becoming less of a planner because it allows for more flexibility and it also anticipates that you don't know exactly what's
Yeah.
going to transpire.
Well, we've been wrestling with this a little bit because, starting to use the e-bike sometimes. And so where do I charge it? So, I've gone to, state parks where there's no place to charge. And I've never done more than an overnight, so it's always worked out. But if as I get older and the e-bike becomes more of a way of dealing with it, then charging it might be an issue. And we've started to do a few tours with our dogs, and that's part of the reason I put together the e-bike was to tow the dogs. So got two dogs in one trailer. So it was like 150 pounds of dogs in trailer, plus some of the touring gear, and that just wouldn't work unless I did have someplace to charge, even if we're camping.
I have a question for you. Definitions. There's bike touring, there's bike packing,
Yeah,
there's bike camping. And I have some thoughts on that. Bike packing appears to be a more of a gravel frame setup and wider tires and more off-road and really skinny equipment. A really small two-person tent, maybe
right.
on the front handlebars, maybe a frame bag, and maybe a seat pack in the back that's 16 or 18 liters, and you can stuff a sleeping bag in there and a few clothes. And then there's what we've been doing, which is bike camping, and we're carrying a full load, front and rear panniers in most cases. Is there any difference? Do you see any difference in those?
But some of it's history and labeling. So, going back 10 years, maybe past, it was always bike touring, 15 years, whatever. And then some people with mountain bikes started doing this, and the Bob trailer and they were tow trailers at first, and they would ride off road. They would go camping, off on non pavement or single tracks, whatever. Um, and that seemed to make sense, that you'd tow a trailer. I did that once with panniers, and it was okay, but you kind of realize it's not really it's not the best way of doing it. Um, and then the bike hacking label started to pop up, and then people geared up like bike packers started going on our weekend tours or started just going down the coast on a road tour. And I think what happened was bike packing became commercially much more important than bike camping, bike touring, whatever you want to. I'm going to say bike touring to distinguish it because everyone's camping. Um, and the word started to supplant touring and maybe started to replace bike camping, and everything became bike packing. It's becoming bike packing. Um, so thinking of it in terms of bike touring mostly dates me, puts me in a certain historic period of this history that's very different than what evolved. And I think part of what drives a lot of this is the commercial aspect to it. And, the invention of the gravel bike was kind of a weird thing. Like people are afraid of riding on the road, and then there's these gravel roads all over the place. Not so much for us in Southern California, but I guess in the
Right.
Midwest, as we found out on our tour, they're all over the place. And so they started, making a bike for that purpose. And then people started hanging bags off them, some variation of what they used to do with the mountain bikes or still do with mountain bikes. And the thing is, it's different in the sense that if you don't want to get snagged on a branch, you know, and get through narrow areas, then panniers are a liability. Also, having a lot of weight on a bike when you're going up little, when you're doing technical trails is, even gravelly stuff is a problem too. So what's funny about it is the practical need of riding off-road with camping equipment has infected the on-road bike touring, kind of thing. And sort of unnecessarily, I think it's just people I want to do this, and they go get the stuff that people are selling in the stores and they're familiar with, or gets the attention, and that's bike packing. And then they find that they're not really bike packing anymore, they're bike touring. And they have the advantage of, being a little faster and lighter. So I think that the difference between these various things is a matter of marketing and time. And I think what probably happens is that there's just going to be a lot of cross fertilization of bike packing gear ending up on bike tourists, and bike tourist gear ending up on bike packers, and bikes variation. There's always a variation because most people, I found, their first tour was they used whatever bike was at hand. And if they liked it and wanted to do it again, there's a difference. A lot of people like it and never do it again.
Yeah.
If they liked it and want to do it again, then they start getting a touring bike, or they start getting different. They stop wearing backpacks. They start doing things that experienced people don't do, but they've got some experience now and they've traveled with experienced people, and they start to emulate it. I mean, I think my meetup group has sold a lot of touring bikes. It's because
I'm
people
sure
start
it
off,
has.
and then the next thing, oh, look at that nice touring bike they just got, and, sometimes multiple touring bikes, a lot of us are gearheads, and gravel bikes and, things like that, or people customizing, converting old mountain bikes into touring bikes, things like that. So I think initially most people is just like, this sounds like fun, and here I've got a bike in the garage, and or they do it on a road bike without low gears, and then you see them in the campsite later massaging their knees because they rode road bike style, but with 60 pounds of gear on their bike
Yes,
and without the
absolutely.
gearing, and so it hurts. But that's all comes with experience. There's no school of bike touring, bike packing. There probably is a school of bike packing. I don't know.
What's interesting is, and you mentioned it, is that a lot of people start out riding the bike that they have, and that is totally fine. Um, and then they can progress from there. Maybe what holds back some people from taking this up, maybe there are a couple of things. One is maybe they don't think they're a strong rider. Maybe they don't like their bike. Maybe they don't have any equipment, but they really like the idea of a weekend trip, riding their bike and carrying their equipment. But you can start out pretty minimalist if you want to, and then observe what everybody else does and see if that works for you.
We had a trip to Leo Carrillo, and usually, 5 or 6 people sign up, and that's fine. That's great. It's easy to manage. And 20 people signed up, and I go, what's going on? Where did all these people come from? And it was during a drought. So this is, 7, 8, 10 years ago, whatever it was. And there's a backpacking group that couldn't do their usual trips. There was no water. So out of frustration, they decided to try this. So all these people, like 15 of them, signed up. So 15 people signed up with the bike they had in the garage, basically, and the camping gear they had they were lightweight backpackers.
Sure.
And so they showed where are all these people. So we have this big group. And the one thing that I learned from that is about chairs. So every one of these lightweight backpackers had a foldable chair, and we didn't. And so we were looking at all these chairs. And so, of course, the next thing we went and, got chairs the next chance we had. And now when you see at our little trips, everyone's got a chair, and the only person who doesn't
Yes,
have a chair is the first timer, right?
that's
Um,
right.
anyway, there's just these different um, ways people come to it and respond to it, and learn the skill, the craft, what you do for equipment. I find that people invest a lot of emotional and mental energy in the way they're set up, and they tend to believe it like it was a religious tenet sometimes.
Yeah,
Um, and that's fine.
it is. You mentioned something I want to elaborate on a little bit, but when we do these weekend bike camping trips, everybody gathers early ahead of time. Everybody clusters around and talks gear. They look at the bikes. What kind of bike are you riding? What kind of tires do you have? What kind of gearing do you have? What kind of tent are you carrying? What kind of sleeping bag? Kind of interesting to watch everybody check everybody else's gear out and wonder if the next time we get together, you're going to see some of those people have upgraded or have added to their equipment list. But that's one of the most compelling aspects to me is that observing what other people have done, and they've done it through learning, through doing weekend bike camping trips like this, what kind of gear they'll need and why some gear is better than others. But that's the kind of learning experience these weekend camping, bike camping trips are, is that you learn what other people are doing and you figure out whether that might work for you.
Yeah, I think there's, if you make one of these silly generalizations, there's sort of like two types of bike campers, bike tours, whatever. Um, Ones who have the same equipment and never change.
Yeah.
Okay, so doesn't matter. They've had the same touring bike for 15 years. They've had the same whatever, whatever modifications they made were made long ago, and that's it. And then there's the people who every time show up with something different,
Something new.
and will change their bikes every couple of years, or if not sooner. Um, and I think they're kind of cool in different ways. I it's people. They're just people enjoy either not changing or the whole idea of constantly changing. So I think that there's a kind of culture to bike touring, which is very much a gearhead culture. Although
Mhm.
there's always people who are rolling their eyes when we start doing that, right? Oh, what are they doing? Oh no, they're talking about their stuff, their gear again. Um, and those people that ride the same way, they're not different. They just don't obsess over it. Um, and they might not say anything and buy the next new thing themselves, but they think we're funny.
Let's talk about the meetup group. And I'll tell my personal story about how I joined and how much I love joining this group of people. So I began Googling bike packing in Los Angeles and found the meetup group. And a few years ago, went on my first weekend ride with y'all. I want to encourage people who have thought of doing this, that weekend group like this meetup group is an excellent way to start, no matter what you're writing, because you will learn what others are doing and you can learn from them and you will gain confidence on it.
And if you have a question about gear or how to ride, you will get far more responses than you ever banked on or want. People are very happy to engage in advice and discussion and that sort of thing.
All
Um,
true.
so, be careful when you ask, well, why should I do it that way? Um, the genesis of it was, as I kind of going back to what I said before, uh, I was doing touring, right, and not finding anybody to tour with. And that was definitely not happening on a weekend overnight or something like that. And so someone told me about Outdoors Club, and I just jumped on it, and things took off pretty quickly, but never with any groups. I mean, 4, 5, 6 people on it. But we got like 8 or 9. That was a lot, but it was consistent. I actually liked the interface better than Meetup. Now the idea was, as I said, is to have people to tour with, so I could do overnight rides or whatever with other people. And that's essentially what happened, and that's pretty much its purpose for me. Um, and the advantage of being the organizer is I get to pick what weekends. Um, you know, so you know how it is, oh, there's this thing I want to go, but I have this other plan. Well, I can,
It's good to
or,
be the boss.
yeah, it's good to be the boss. Um, but people have different expectations of what my role is, from me. Um, some people occasionally think of me like a tour guide, like they're hiring, adventure cycling to go on a tour, and the leader's going to, know everything and say everything and, describe everything and maybe have, I carry extra tools. That's about it, um, so that's one difference. It's not, I'm not trying to be, nor do I want to be someone who feels, some people feel they should pay or would expect to be paid. This is just fun. I wanted to keep it loose. I don't want to be the authority too much, no more than I have to. So I try to keep it fairly loose. I like to delegate. Like for years, I was always starting the fire in the campground. And I said to myself, this is stupid. All these other people can start the fire. So, maybe I'll go get wood, but pretty much the fire gets started somewhere or another and someone else starts it and I don't have to do it. And that's an example of delegating. Or someone might say, I'll do sweep. If no one says I'll do sweep, I might do sweep if I think the people can figure out how to get there, and it's funny because some people who've been doing this for years and have been over the same route for years, and I'll ask them, well, you want to lead, they don't know where to go. Someone has to know where we're going. And if someone decides to get out ahead and go on a flyer, that's their problem. You know, sometimes they get lost.
But I think that's one of the beauties of and it's a small group. It's not a huge group, but a group event like this where, you do have the comfort of there are other people riding with you, and you may become separated to a certain point, but they're not that far away. And it kind of gives you a sense of comfort that somebody knows where they're going, right?
Well, the times when someone has taken a wrong turn and gotten lost or added miles and miles to the route, it always turned out okay. They always
Yep.
found us and we get a little laugh at their expense. Um, but it does happen. People take a wrong turn and it goes off, a completely different direction or parallel direction that's 3 or 4 times longer or hilly or something. That does happen from time to time. I think another thing that happens if someone's new and they're not physically or mechanically up to the task, then there have been occasions when they've had to be rescued by a friend.
Hmm.
You know, they cramped up but they're already behind. My idea is that it's a group ride and you try to keep it a group ride, and if people could do their own thing, but that's on them, But if someone has a mechanical failure or something like that, that's not their fault. So what someone told me comparing our group to another group um, is that they liked our group because we waited for people or we were concerned about whether they were okay. Where the other group is sort of like, well, you're on your own, fix it, and they just go on and leave the person.
Uh,
And I can see that mentality. I'm not necessarily saying that's not good. That's totally bad, but it's not the vibe I want, you know, um, where it's sort of the survival of the fittest. And if something breaks down, you're on your own, and
hmm.
you may fix it and catch up. But I'm more concerned about the people who go ahead and get lost than the people who fall behind because they've got a physical problem or a mechanical problem. Um, I want those people to feel that they're not alone, that they're supported.
Two groups I want to bring attention to, Greg, that you're in back of both of them. The first one, of course, is the Southern California Bike Camping Meetup Group. And if you live in Southern California and you are interested in bike camping, you should join this group. Join for a weekend. There's also a Facebook group, which is the bike camping group. There's always some interesting tidbits there that you can pick up on. So there's a couple of sources for you to uh, to read up, to join, to participate, and learn more. But the bottom line is, Greg and I would highly encourage you to take up bike camping. Is that not right?
Yeah. And along with that is start acting politically, whatever that might mean to you, to try and get more hiker biker sites established.
Yeah,
What's happened is they've shrunk, the numbers shrunk
they
considerably.
have. They have.
So, and weird stuff like, we used to be able to ride through Camp Pendleton. We can't anymore. We have to go on the highway. Um, the San Juan Capistrano hiker biker's gone. The Carlsbad's gone. Um, uh, some aren't really kept up well. Some are really nice, but my approach has been pretty much, with a few exceptions, to we go to the hiker biker site and I worry about, are we all going to get in if there's too many people? And we always get in,
Yeah.
but I worry about it sometimes. Um, the other thing is to reserve a state park site is nearly impossible. I don't plan that far
Yeah.
in advance.
It's a six
And
month ordeal.
yeah, so we end up in RV parks if we don't do that,
Right.
which sometimes are okay. It depends. Um, there started to be a couple of years ago, people started posting more and more about these trailers they had built that they could sleep in. And it's this sort of like all subgenre I haven't actually seen in person, but keeps on popping up on the Facebook page.
Yeah.
And some people were getting angry about it, and I don't really respond to everything people say about this. It's like somehow it was too impure, you know. And I don't care. That's fine. That's interesting. Look at the ingenuity the person used. I think someone's actually trying to sell one, So you tow this, because I think what's happened is e-biking has changed the dynamic here.
Hmm.
So you can have a trailer you sleep in, and of course your gear goes in it, and tow it on an e-bike. And that's probably lighter than what I'm doing with my dogs.
Could
Um,
be.
and why not? So one of the things I think that's interesting is sometimes there tends to be a kind of almost ideological difference between different groups of people. And you can kind of see it a little bit in the bike packing versus bike camping kinds of setup. And now you've got a third thing is the trailer. Not that cargo trailers have been around for a long time,
Yes.
and they were more popular. They've become less popular, but the trailer that you sleep in, is a whole nother thing.
It's an
And
interesting setup. I haven't seen one in person yet either. I've seen some interesting pictures. Um, and I don't have a problem with it. I think that it's just one more wrinkle to
yeah,
or interpretation of how people want to do this. We could call it bike glamping, I guess, even though it's not really glamping, but to give it a, kind of a term. Whatever terminology you want to use, bike touring, bike camping, bike packing. If you live in Southern California, join us for a meetup weekend. I think you'll really enjoy it. Greg, it's been great. Number one, great seeing you, and I look forward to our next adventure. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Give my best to Audrey, and keep on pedaling, young man.
okay, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.